This is part 3 of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, a very significant part of the 7-part element. In this reflection, I'd like to bring together Thomas Merton's reflections on the self, choices of the self, what happens when we shoot that which is good, the albatross. Do we know how to turn the crossbow on ourselves, which may be actually the real issue, not shooting something which actually gives life? And the confusions we often have in making decisions, what we turn on, what we accept, and a whole variety of motivations, misguided desires, misreads of what's actually happening in the inner life and the outer life. But let me start with the read. It's from the book. It's a Lenten series by Robert Incostu, The Way of Thomas Merton, A Prayer Journey Through Lent. He said, it is by listening to our conscience, accepting our limit. No, it's the problem of sanctity and salvation is, in fact, the problem of finding out who I am and of discerning my true self. We are at liberty to be real or to be unreal. We may be true or false. The choice is ours. But we cannot make these choices with impunity. Causes have effects, and if we lie to ourselves and to others, then we cannot expect to find truth and reality whenever we happen to want them. If we have chosen the way of falsity, we must not be surprised that the truth eludes us when we finally come to need it. In one sense, what is going on in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner with the mariner himself and the young person, the wedding guest, is in fact, Mariner has made problematic decisions in his life, and the young person who's about to go to the wedding feast is about to make problematic decisions. And the dilemma is when we make decisions that in fact are not about life, when we in fact are potentially lying to ourselves about who we are and how we are to live, then truth is very elusive. It's often very difficult to find because we have not been true to ourselves in the process, so truth does not reveal itself to us in this way. Now, when we get to section 3 of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, of course, the mariner and the 200 sailors on the ship, 4 times 50, as the poem goes on to say, are in a situation, in fact, they have killed externally the albatross, which in fact has guided them across the turbulent waters. But often people in despair, people who are paralyzed, people who are parched, people who are not knowing where to turn in the confusions of their soul and society, any little ship that seems to be coming their way of aid, they sometimes can naively be open to receive that ship coming alongside. So the part 3 begins with, in that sense, I saw something in the sky no bigger than my fist. At first it seemed a little spark, then it seemed a mist. It moved and moved and took at last a certain shape I wist. And so you have the mariner and those on the ship paralyzed, not able to, parched in many ways. They talk about their throat, their lips. They're in a situation in which the decisions they have made have led them to a precarious place on their journey. And in that, hope has died. Cynicism dominates. Paralysis is part, actually, of their life. So something that seems to offer hope, possibility of getting out of this dark, painful, difficult place, not realizing that the ship that is coming their way actually is a place, if they're not careful, they naively buy into, is going to take them to yet to darker, more dangerous places. This is often it's brought out very nicely in the recent Rings of Power, in which the young Galadriel, who in the 8-part series, she's revenging her brother's death as she understands what the cause of it. But out of her desperation to vindicate what's happened to her brother, she in fact aligns herself to Sauron, and he plays right into her need and desperation for justice. And so we can see what Coleridge is doing in section 3 is there's the initial killing of the albatross, then there's the deep and dark consequences of that in his life. And then there's the danger of welcoming anyone who seems to be, at a distance anyway, going to assist one to get out of the dire predicament that the mariner and the sailors are on. So the message here is beware who we say yes to in the midst of longing to get out of a difficult plight, a difficult situation, a painful situation, because the very person or group naively we say yes to may in fact deepen the problem even more. And there's a saying, left of the boom and right of the boom. Left of the boom means that in fact we see the decision we are making and the consequence of it, so we go left of making such a decision. Right of the boom, in fact, is we continue along a path that leads to more painful and tragic and difficult situations. And so section 3 continues with the mariner describing what in fact is going on. And you get this, he recognizes in the midst of the difficulty, he cries out for mercy. It says, gramercy, gramercy, they for joy did grin. Gramercy is an old English term that says great mercy. I'm in desperate need at this point for mercy, for kindness to assist me. But there's silence in terms of the greater mercy that he's crying out for. And this dark ship with the two coming on it, playing a game of dice. So what are they going to do with these people? How will they manipulate these people to serve their own interest and in fact turn them into what they are, really wraiths and skeletons and death dealers who are playing with others, who themselves have killed albatrosses in their own life, and rather than acknowledging what they've done, they continue down that path and they become, as I said, wraiths in many ways, and then they feed and they live off like parasites of others. Whereas the mariner realizes that he needs to get out of this, but if he's not careful, he's going to be courting those very people who will take him further down, and he will become like them. He'll become like them if he continues that journey. So the gramercy is very important. And also you get this again, this religious cry where the mariner says, Heaven's Mother, send us grace. So he knows he and the mariners are in need of something to get them out of the situation. At this point, they don't seem to have the discernment to know the particular ship that's coming alongside of them, where it might take them. But increasingly, the mariner is becoming aware of this because the sun is setting in the west. And it's like as the ship with the two on it, it's like bars behind them, so they can't even see the sun. Night is coming on. And so you get this conflict in the mariner between saying yes to those who coming, who say maybe rescuing them, but recognizing very clearly they need mercy, they need Mary, as it were, to come to their aid in a situation in which there can go in two different directions. Coleridge is very graphic in section 3 in describing these wraiths, these ghosts, the one who is increasingly imploding internally. He describes them very, very well. The woman, her lips are red, her looks are free, her locks are yellow as gold, her skin is white as leprosy, and she is far like her death than he. And before he mentions the other person on the ship. And so he describes, Coleridge in section 3, where a person might end up if they continue down a certain path, similar to what Tolkien does in Lord of the Rings, where elves, if they're not careful, they become orcs. You get the deterioration of a person's soul and the consequences of that if they are not true to who they might be, who they could be. The mariner is really grappling with what does he do now in a situation. He's on the ship with other friends or the community that he's with. Who does he turn to? Because often in great myths you have two different paths a person can take. They follow the darker path further and further because they cry out for mercy. There's silence, there's no answer, there's no assistance. And so what you have in section 3 is this almost prayer for guidance, for mercy, for Mary, the Queen of Heaven, but there's silence, there's no assistance. They seem to be absolutely alone. And so the prayer, the cry for assistance, it seems to have gone unanswered. So then what does a person do? They're pulled in two directions. The hope of something greater to take them out of their situation. There's no assistance at this particular point in section 3. And the danger is to think if I'm not answered immediately, there is going to be no answer, so I have to make a decision of turning either to darkness or living in a paralyzed, a dark, a painful situation. And so section 3 is a very, very fascinating one in terms of psychologically and spiritually, as how does one navigate after killing an albatross that is in fact that which guides us through time, through history, through trying situations. And consequence is then a situation of paralysis, not knowing how to navigate a dark night, clouds of unknowing, and then aid seems to be coming along. And so, do I turn that way when the very sources I thought would assist me, there's silence, there's lack of support, there's no eminence, there's no rescue, there's no deus ex machina, God out of the machine who comes to assist. So section 3 is a fascinating say, what does one do in a situation where there's darkness, there's lack of ability to navigate anymore, and someone seems to assist, and yet those who seem to assist, as Shakespeare would say in Hamlet, seems. In fact, it's a place of going further down a difficult direction. One of the key points to note in section 3 also, which follows on sections 1 and 2, the mariner has shot the albatross with his crossbow. We have to be careful in life what we shoot. And often, if we're not discerning, we can shoot the very things that lead us to life, whereas in fact, the crossbow should be turned on ourselves and the problematic element of our false selves or our false identity. That's rather than blaming others or turning on others, each and all at different parts of their journey must turn the crossbow on their ego, or what Christians would call the old Adam or the old Eve. There's another passage here in Robert's book on Merton on Lent. He says, all sin starts from the assumption that my false self, the self that exists only in my own egocentric desires, is the fundamental reality of life, to which everything else in the universe is ordered. Thus I use up my life in the desire for pleasures, and the thirst for experiences, for power, honor, knowledge, and a love to clothe this false self and construct its nothingness into something objectively real. And I wind experiences around myself and cover myself with pleasures and glory like bandages in order to make myself perceptible to myself and the world, as if I were an invisible body that could only become visible when something visible covered its surface. And so Coleridge is quite insightful here because he realizes the crossbow, if we're not careful, for we all carry crossbows in which we kill certain things and in which we protect certain things. And if we're not careful, we protect the very thing that the crossbow has to shoot and kill, our false self, the ego, the image we project, the persona, which by its very nature is transient and fleeting like a cloud. And we shoot things that we shouldn't shoot, that in fact, like the albatross, is what guides us. And so as the Rime of the Ancient Mariner unfolds, and linking it with some of Merton's reflections in this Lenten series by Robert, we can see that Coleridge is unpacking at a deeper level a psychological, spiritual insight about the self. What is the self? And in a culture that we're dealing with of identity politics, there's the danger that many freeze what they think is the self, but in fact that is what the crossbow has to shoot at. And the deeper part of them, which is the albatross, they shoot at. And so this discernment of Coleridge in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner has a lot of overlap with what Thomas Merton is doing in his ongoing work in attempting to unpack the layers of ego, self, what has to be shot, which we identify with who we are, and then what has to be recovered, which in fact is the albatross deep within, and the dangers. We shoot the very thing that guides us, and we genuflect to the very thing that takes us into the dark, dangerous places of section 3 of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Section 3 then ends with 4 times 50 living men, with never a sigh or groan, with heavy thump and lifeless lump, they dropped down one by one. Their souls did from their bodies fly. They fled to bliss or woe, and every soul that passed me by, like the whiz of my crossbow. And so the crossbow comes up very clearly, and if we're not true to, in fact, shooting what needs to be shot, the false self, we end up also firing at other people. and other situations, and shooting those that in fact are meant to give us life in community. But because the mariner did not know how to use his crossbow properly, he shot the good, and as a result of that, many other goods were shot in the process as well. And the recovery of the mariner and beginning to find his way back to who he is, rather than following the dark ship that was blocking out the sun as it was setting, then leads us into section 4 of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, where he is beginning slowly to find his way again, but very slowly. The recovery takes time. Doesn't happen instantly. And in a culture that likes instant results for difficult situations, the mariner and what Coleridge is doing points out that certain decisions take us to places, and often takes time for those decisions to play themselves out. So recovering also takes certain period of time, and this is where sections 4 to 7 begin to move in the healing, the recovery direction, of which 1 to 3 have taken the mariner to places that in fact he's reached the sort of reductio ad absurdum of where when he keeps going, this is where the ship and the race will take him, and he realizes there's another path forward, but he's at this point not quite experiencing what that is. But section 4, 5, and 6 begin to point that direction, which finds its fulfillment in 7.